beep, beep, beep. Yep, more from the NHS. Oh, good, you can beep, 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 IIA. Plus, bum pipe for your enjoyment. It just keeps getting better. Watch, subscribe, buy me a coffee, the usual. Click like, notifications, all the doodads you have to do. I'll see you in a minute. Go on, watch.
And then let's add to that the NHS Confederation LGBTQ plus Leaders Network also did a member survey at the back end of last year, which they showed the results of recently. And it's really interesting survey findings, right? Because actually what they found was that all that stuff that I just said to you, well, the picture's actually worse than that. But people don't feel safe to be, even though staff surveys are anonymous, people still don't feel safe to be able to say how they're really experiencing stuff. And there's obviously more trust in the NHS Confed's Leaders Network. So they had 540 members that responded, with 78% of those coming from the community. They found that there's a significantly poorer workplace experience for LGBTQIA plus colleagues, and they're experiencing higher rates of homophobia and transphobia as compared to those NHS staff survey statistics. So here's just a bit of an overview of some of their findings. They found like 25% of respondents said they had experienced direct or indirect homophobia, which is compared to 13% in the NHS staff survey. Biphobia still there at 9%, and then transphobia at 20%.
My goodness me, what an ugly picture is painted here about the NHS, which seems to be one of the worst employers in the world to work for. Extraordinary, considering that I know a number of people who do work for them who find the job rewarding. But this is particularly interesting because we've got another group. It just gets worse. Right, we've now got the NHS Confederation LGBTQ plus group, which is 2,000 people apparently. So this is on top of Mel's boondoggle. This is another boondoggle. Each one of these groups will have a website. Each one of these groups will have a set budget. What the hell is going on? No, so they did their own survey, their separate survey. I wonder if that's because they didn't like the original one. Might be, mightn't it? You don't know with these people, do they? That doesn't tell us what it wants. I don't know. Don't use that one. Why not? Because it doesn't tell us what we need. What do you need? Grievance. Lots of grievance. So our Health and Care LGBTQ plus Leaders Network has published new survey findings. Gosh, not another survey, which shows that LGBTQ plus staff across health and care are continuing to experience greater levels of discrimination in the workplace. Over 540 network care members responded. What the hell? Working at all levels. And the remaining 22% responding as allies. Allies? Right, well, okay, right. It's just nonsense. The network, which represents over 2,000 LGBTQ plus, they've got 2,000 of these Fruit Loops working in the NHS in this network alone. Well, that might be some allies as well. Mr. Smith from the Butchers, who likes to gusset fumble once a week. Who is it? Who's included? So this is, the findings show that continue to have significant homophobia and transphobia compared to the NHS staff survey. So now the NHS staff survey is wrong. I feel like I'm descending into a hole of lunacy. Then we get the survey findings coming up here now. They disclosed higher rates of direct or indirect homophobia, slightly higher rates of transphobia, and less biphobia. What is the point of all this? What they were worried about, though, was the organisation's ability to respond to incidents swiftly and appropriately. Really? Interesting. So 25% said they'd experienced direct or indirect homophobia, compared to 13% in the NHS staff survey. It doesn't mean anything. She sat here rattling off. None of it means anything. It's just rubbish. 9% of survey respondents have experienced direct or indirect biphobia, and 20% of survey respondents experienced direct or indirect transphobia. Direct or indirect, is it? Direct or indirect? I tell you this now. I've worked across business, I've worked voluntary, I've worked in every sector there is, public sector, private sector, and I'm a puff, right? And I've been a puff all my life, except, everybody knew, but nobody talked about it. It was those days where like, but when I go anywhere, I've got friends who are at work. They very rarely experience homophobia now. This is insane. What's wrong with the NHS? It's completely, utterly bankrupt as far as people's morality is concerned. Or these people are just full of shit. I know which I'm going with. Again, which I'm going with. Here's the bit she didn't read out. Right? Here's the bit she didn't read out. Only 14% of respondents felt their organisation responded swiftly. She might have read this out, actually. This highlights an urgent need for NHS leaders to... Right, no, she didn't. She ignored this bit. So let's go on to the next bit. The next slide came up after she mentioned the 20%. But here's the kicker. Here's the bit that you need to watch for, because this is what these swine are up to. This highlights an urgent need for NHS leaders to fully embed LGBTQ+ inclusion within their workplaces and ensure that policies are acted on and fully communicated to all staff. Acted on. This is a dangerous game they're playing. This is a dangerous game, but it gets worse. I know I know you can't stand anymore. I know you're on your knees with despair, but believe me, it gets worse. Let's hear some more.
Which is into this, right? So you may have heard about minority stress. I'm not going to spend loads of time talking about it. I just kind of use this infographic to kind of give people, like, if you stand back and take a look at it. And minority stress can be experienced by anybody from a marginalised group. So this isn't just LGBTQIA+, but that's the focus of this session. So this will be for our colleagues that work in the NHS, but this will also be relevant to anybody else who accesses our services. So, you know, across the board, when people experience minority stress, they're experiencing higher levels of prejudice and discrimination and events on a more daily basis. They have higher expectations that they're going to experience prejudice and discrimination. There are those higher levels of covering, concealing who they are. And again, we know that's in the workplace, but we also know that patients hide this information as well because they don't feel safe to come out to healthcare professionals. And then what that can then result in is this internalization of societal stigma. I'm not going to talk through that whole infographic, but what it shows you is that as those elements of minority stress impact on somebody on a daily basis, what can actually start to happen is it starts to have repercussions on people's health, mental health, but also health. So if you then look to the boxes that are on the far right-hand side, these are like the potential clinical outcomes that people who are experiencing minority stress are more likely to develop. And you can see it's listed there for yourself. So they're more likely to develop heart disease or cancer or diabetes, all these different health conditions that will be exacerbated by this minority stress. And this is why it's really important that we're looking at the inequalities that our colleagues are experiencing. We're looking at the inequalities that exist within the NHS, and they do. You would have seen this data before. I really wish somebody somewhere would update and do some more recent research and data so that we're not always relying on Stonewall's LGBT in Britain reports from 2018. But this is where we're at. So we know that LGBTQIA+ people are already more likely to experience poor mental health, self-harm, suicidal ideation, hate crime, so-called conversion therapy, inappropriate cancer screening. They're going to have less access to services. And that was before the pandemic. And what we do know that there is enough research that shows that the pandemic did adversely affect our particular community. So this data, it will not have gotten better since 2018. It will have only have gotten worse. Just to pick a couple out that I always think it's just really shocking. 40% of lesbian and bi women were told by a healthcare professional that they didn't need a cervical screening because they weren't having heterosexual penetrative sex, I'm assuming. And that 1 in 50 who asked for a screening were then refused by a healthcare professional. 1 in 7 have avoided seeking treatment because they don't feel safe. 1 in 5 aren't out to their healthcare professional about their sexual orientation. 15% of disabled people have experienced discrimination. It goes on and on. If you want to read a little bit more about some of this stuff, so when the slide decks come out, these are all hyperlinked, so you should be able to just click on them and it should take you through to the report. So the LGBT in Britain report was slightly updated in 2020 by the Hidden Figures, but it was a report that was done on like the first 6 months, I think, of the pandemic, but nothing since then. You've got the one in the middle is a really good one, and that kind of came out mid last year. And what they've done is they've kind of gathered all of the other kind of research and scoping evidence that's out there around the social detriments of LGBT health and well-being. Some really great stuff from the LGBT Leaders Network, from NHS Confed, the GLAD and BMA report around people in the medical profession and the levels of discrimination that they're facing. Really worth a read of that. The National Institute for Health and Care Research there's some really lovely recommendations in there about how to improve communication.
Absolutely unbelievable. Unbelievable, unmitigated rubbish being taught as clinical fact. This is exactly what we're seeing here. Now, we saw previously in that little bit we've had already about the Confederation, but now this takes on a whole new level of insanity. This is the introduction of something called minority stress, which is a theory that's just bullshit. Everybody's a minority of one. Your stress is your problem, right? Even if that means you've got to talk to your boss, still your problem. Minority stress. You have to understand what is happening here and how these people view the public, right? So I say this to the warrior teachers all the time. I think it's important that we get it out there. These people that support this, the EDI, DEI, LGBTQ, critical social justice, critical race theory, this bloody neoliberal hard left lunatics, they think we're all poorly, right? Because we don't think like they do. They think we're all poorly. We're unwell as far as they're concerned because we don't think like they do, right? Which is exactly what happened with Marxism. Even though this isn't Marxism itself, it's got a Marxist framework, power and oppression. They think we're unwell, right? So in other words, we haven't developed the same consciousness as them, therefore we must be forced to do it. And they're now starting with the blackmail, the typical behavior of a cult, the blackmail, right? The emotional blackmail. That's what this minority stress stuff is about. So what she's saying is, experience of prejudice, discrimination, blah, 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 concealment, blah, 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 internalization of societal stigma and all the crap that comes with it, coping responses. And she's then saying that there's an epigenetic changes in transcriptional regulation. They're actually saying this changes your body. They're actually saying this affects the DNA in your cells. Now, I need a doctor to tell me that I'm right about that. Allostatic overload, HPA access. This is absolute unmitigated bullshit. What they've taken is the idea of stress, extreme stress, not, oh, I'm having a bad day because somebody won't call me a woman. Extreme stress, which is what they've done with PTSD, right? That's what they've done with PTSD. They've made it something that everybody can have, right? Instead of something that's very serious. They're doing the same thing here with severe stress. They're saying that any stress, minority stress, any stress, which is actually, by the way, good for you, any stress can cause inflammation, immune function, cardiovascular function, metabolic function, and endocrine and hormonal function problems. And the list goes on. So they are saying, because we aren't dealing with the demands of the LGBTQ+, that it will cause people to have cancer, heart disease, HIV, viral load, cell count, susceptibility to virus and bacteria, treatment side effects. What are you going to do? You're treating people for not believing in your bullshit? This is dangerous stuff, folks. I mean, we're trammeling towards the end now. This is dangerous stuff. So apparently it causes diabetes. If I won't recognize that a man is a woman, and that person will then have diabetes because I don't do it. This is insane cobblers. And it's under the banner of NHS England, and it's being taught by somebody who is in no way qualified to do any of this. None of it. It's infuriating how bad this is. Absolutely beyond the pale nonsense. And they then pull up Stonewall's bloody survey from 2018, which has been debunked a dozen times, quickly followed by, as you can see there, the LGBT in Britain health report from Stonewall. And not only from Stonewall, they've then got GLAD to throw into the mix as well. Those absolute clowns that work with the BMA. Well, there you go, folks. I thought a break, I was getting so angry. But there you go, folks. There's everything that I've got. Then we do have another addition to this on the end of me wittering on now, which is if you want to see the 10-minute discussion that takes place after this event, which is visited by a number of people. and you'll see some of the people from the NHS there. One of the main players seems to be, he says, somebody called Catherine Frances Brown. I don't know anything about Catherine other than she's the income delivery lead at NHS England and seems to be involved in EDI. So you'll see her talk about the fact that she's just been writing something for the cabinet. Interesting, isn't it? Other than that, thank you so much if you followed the entire series. What I will do tomorrow is I'll have the entire thing in one file, and I'll just put that up in case people want to watch it all in one go. To all of my supporters, thank you so much for keeping me going. If you can buy me a coffee, do, but most of all, come and be a warrior teacher. Other than that, back to business as usual tomorrow. I'll find someone else to take the mickey out of. I'll see you later. Bye, everybody.
And I think that brings me to the end. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. You have me for the next 10 minutes or so. Unless I've just stunned you all into absolute silence, which is what usually happens whenever I'm delivering something.
Do you mind popping your your details are there already?
Catherine.
We'll
put it into chat.
Hi guys, apologies for missing a majority of the meeting. I got stuck on a ministerial submission that dragged on and on and on. Thank you, Mel, that was amazing. How do we make it better in our organisation? Does that make sense? So we've looked at all these horrible issues that are going on. How do we start to make it better?
I think each organisation needs to have an action plan, and we need to make sure that we're holding our senior leaders to account on it. I think from my experience, if I speak very honestly in this space, is that I think that trusts have way more flexibility and room for manoeuvre in some of this stuff than we do at NHS England. At NHS England, we are absolutely bound to, there's that immediate dotted line into the Department of Health and Social Care. Everything is political, big P and little p. And so we have way more challenges. I think that NHS England should be setting standards and leading the way. They have different ideas, and so we're at this kind of stalemate. So I think it's about being able to make connections across trusts. So those trusts that are doing the work, that are having positive results from having good action plans and having a commitment from senior leaders to actually do the work, is trying to get them to make sure that they're sharing with everybody else what's working for them. It's got to be buy-in from the top, because without it, the stuff that we then try to do is not going to reach anywhere. It sounds like a really obvious thing, but it's the no-brainer. You kind of need to look at staff survey results. What is it telling you, and what do we need to do to fix it? And then just get on with doing the things that we need to do to fix it. How do we make it a safer space for people from more marginalised communities? Does that answer the question, or did you want something more sort of deeper, in depth from me?
No, and thank you. I think you've actually nailed it. As an NHS England employee, I completely understand where you're coming from, and coming from a trust background where it was actively encouraged to set up the network, and the board really got behind it. It's been a real cultural shift coming here actually, and seeing almost completely the polar opposite. So totally agree with what you're saying about top down. So yeah, I think we've got a cultural shift that we need to have here, I think, as well. But I'll shut up and let other people talk.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And actually, where we're currently at is we're not even on an even playing field. We're not at the starting line. We got moved back 100 paces by the last government. So what I saw behind the scenes for the last year and a half is the government attacking a lot of work that was being done within NHS England around stuff to do with our community, pieces of work that were halted, that weren't progressed. And senior leaders were pushed into the corners, into the dark corners, and they're still scared to come out and step out into the light, even though we have a change of government I mean, I'm not saying that the current government is perfect, because it's not, but they at least have stopped the culture war that was kind of going on. And that 18 months that the last government had of attacking us has pushed us back, and we're now way behind, and we need to catch up before we can even start to move things forward. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thanks, Melanie. I was going to ask about that in particular, actually, just whether you got a sense that there was any improvement, or is it at best, the thumb screws aren't being tightened anymore, I suppose, and clearly, not necessarily internally, but as far as patient care is concerned, there have been some things which have been worse, since the summer, than even before. So that's a frightening thought. But I just wondered, in terms of that. So I work for an ICB, so we're kind of in between, as we are separate. But if NHSE breathes in hard, everyone starts panicking and runs and hides under their desks. So it's kind of similar in that sense, but maybe not quite so direct. I'm just wondering, if you sense any sort of shift, in the overall mood and confidence of people in leadership positions, or whether they're
I want to say yes, Chris. I want to say yes so badly, but I'm yet to see it, if I'm honest. And I'm not always in the right spaces in terms of my day job as well. I'm at a lower banded level. I don't get into some spaces that I would like to. I did have a conversation a little while ago with Michael Brady, who heads up the LGBT health team, because I've talked to him a lot over the last year and a half, and some of the difficulties that we've both had. And he seemed to think that there was a little tiny ray of hope in some of the conversations that he'd been involved in, and some of the work that was kind of being scoped. The fact that there were a group of people allocated at Department of Health and Social Care to actually be looking at action plans around sexual orientation and gender identity, which is a real step forward, right? But I haven't seen it past hearing it from Michael, if that makes sense. So it hasn't reached our senior leaders. And so I do believe that they are still stuck in the shadows. They are still scared to come out. At the end of the day, if we're being perfectly honest, there have been previous secretaries of state that have threatened people with stuff. So it's no surprise that they have been scared into the shadows. And I think they just don't know that it's safe yet to come out. And so I think it is our job to help to coax them out and let them know that, because I think they've just taken advantage of that breathing space from the culture war, but that's not enough, right? It's how do we repair the damage from all of that? So no. Like I say, if you take the workplace equality standard I've heard it mentioned for over 2 years, that it's kind of been in conversations. It was then kind of allocated to WTE policy team, and they were holding it for a while, but then the budget got removed, and there was this and there was that, and now it's kind of possibly being moved on to another team. Even if I saw that work actually start, that might give me a little bit of, okay, now we're stepping out of it. But whilst all of this stuff still continues to be on hold, whilst the organisation continues to not develop any kind of action plan or progress any of this stuff, I don't feel that positive about it, if I'm totally honest. I'm not seeing enough being said or done in those spaces to start having those conversations and moving stuff forward, unfortunately.
I feared that might be your answer, but it's useful to have it anyway. So thanks for that, Melanie.
Doesn't mean that we stop doing what we do, right?
No, of course not.
It just means that we kind of go into gear and we just continue to just push and push and push. But it's hard. It's hard because I do sometimes feel like I'm just banging my head against a wall some of the time. But we just have to keep on keeping on, right?
NHSE leadership generally is not necessarily best known for standing up to pressure from above.
Absolutely.
I know you need to hop off, Melanie. There are some things in the chat if you've had a look over on them. Just a few questions, but also just a few comments as well.
Yeah, leaking stuff to the media has been pretty awful. I'm not going to lie, because what those network members have done and if we're perfectly honest, they are a network member, because the stories that have run have been, and they've then had quotes from gender critical activists out there. So this is how I know that it's gender critical members that will have leaked that information. And what makes me really sad about that is that, because what they've done now is that they've made all of our network space is now unsafe. And so any meeting that we're in at any point, we know that there is this possibility, despite the rules of engagement and whatever else, is that anybody could share anything at any time. And it makes me sad. I feel it's very underhand. It's very difficult to manage as well. The best way that I know how to manage it is that I'm always honest, I'm upfront, I'm transparent, I talk about it all of the time. I try to take wind out of the sails. I'm starting to preempt when we're going to put something out, when I anticipate that there will be somebody who's going to oppose it in some way, shape or form, and then try to prepare for it to make sure that our ducks are in a row before we kind of go out there. The main thing is, so what normally happens when something goes out to the media, more often than not, it will go onto social media. Someone will tag a minister, then the Department of Health and Social Care are then getting in touch with us at NHSE saying, what's this all about? And then we're having to answer questions back up the chain. And that's frustrating. But what my general feeling around it is that it's normally a bit of a stink for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, they've run their next story and they're on to the next person or next, issue or whatever it is. And everything then stops. So the last story that was run was just before Christmas, was about our safer spaces. It was such a non-story to start with. They were kind of suggesting that LGBTQIA plus colleagues sit around all day in meetings that have no end time, talking about their sexual orientation and their gender identity. I mean, if only, right, that we were able to do that. But this is the kind of nonsense that we're up against. I share it with members and I just say, yeah, be aware, this has come out, but we're not, what it tells me is that we're doing stuff we're doing the right stuff. If someone feels so strongly they want to leak a non-story out to the media to try to cause problems, that tells me we're doing things in the right way. We just continue to get on with it. The only thing that I can't really come up with an idea of how to conclude it is, how do I make that space safe? I can't. And that's what really bothers me about that. Anything else? In terms of an EDI group, I mean, I definitely have some guidance that I can send to Tash that I've written previously in my day job around setting up a staff network, but you could apply it to an EDI network as well. So just some sort of best practice ideas of the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. More than happy to share those. I might just need to have to tidy them up really quickly before I send them to Tash, but I'm happy to do that for Tash to then circulate for you. Is there anything else before I do need to drop off? If you have any other questions, I stuck my email address into the chat. I'm more than happy if you want to reach out to me on a one-to-one. If you think of a question at a later point, anything that you think that the network or I can support you with, I'm always happy to do it. And just really want to thank you, Tasha, for asking me in to be able to do this and talk about our network and the stuff that we're trying to do. It's stuff that I am so passionate about and really want to try to move things forward along with everybody else. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Melanie, so much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone else. Thanks.
No worries. I'll see you soon.